I want to talk to you about Quebec, and it's an interesting place, and we really didn't do a lot of work there as Rebel News until a couple of years ago when we hired Ezra Levant. She's got to be one of the bravest journalists at Rebel News. It is such an uphill battle to fight for freedom in Quebec, but she does it so courageously in English and in French. I think she's really made a difference. In fact, I know she does. That's what today's story is about. Quebec, especially Montreal, I think, has a worse media culture than even the rest of Canada, than even Toronto or Ottawa, if you can believe it. I think the media there are more obedient to power. They're more clubby and cliquey. It's a smaller pond. We saw this during COVID times when we sent our journalists to Montreal to do journalism during the curfew at night. You might remember that Quebec actually brought in a curfew for adults. Whether you were sick or healthy, whether you were jabbed or not, you had to be at home by 10 p.m. Now, there was an exemption for journalists, bizarrely. So we took that exemption and we went on the streets and we were the only journalists who did that. Not a single other Montreal journalist had any curiosity or had any nonconformity saying, well, let me go out and see what it's like. Like, they were just so obedient. It was so weird. We also saw this at the leaders' debates in Montreal. That's where in the last general election, all the journalists were gathered together in Montreal, at the CBC headquarters, actually, to see their reaction to Rebel News. It wasn't so much that they hated that we were more conservative or whatever. It's that we were different and outsiders and we're not part of their club. It's so tough being a rebel in Quebec. So I salute our Alexa. And by the way, that club, it's not just journalists in the club. The club includes the police and politicians. They're all in it together. Our reporters have been threatened by police. Here they are threatening Alexa just a couple weeks ago, threatening her with arrest just for doing journalism.
Je t'ordonne de circuler parce qu'en ce moment, si tu fais ça, je vais t'arrêter pour
Entente de quoi? Pour avoir fait mon travail de journaliste?
Il est 17h28, tu avertis formellement. Si tu continues à créer la situation, ça va être une entrave.
Quelle situation? Parce que je fais mon travail de journaliste. Tu n'as pas le droit de me toucher. Tu n'as pas le droit de me toucher.
C'est un ordre, sinon je serais pas entrave. Fait que là, je vais te demander de circuler. L'ordre est donné. Si ta décision à partir de maintenant,
sérieusement, on se voit en cours. Je veux avoir ton badge number.
Il y a un arrêt pour ça, madame. Il y a un arrêt.
Je veux avoir ton badge number.
7737.
Toi aussi.
5169.
Votre nom, c'est?
Cyber.
Vous?
À l'air.
À l'air. Vous?
Secto. Allez.
Non, parce qu'on va te voir en cours, monsieur. Savez-vous que je suis en cours contre vous? Pour avoir refusé de nous protéger. D'avoir refusé de nous protéger, vous avez juste... En ce moment, j'ai le droit d'être ici. C'est un lieu public. Et je suis ici. Je m'en fiche, messieurs. Vous ne protégez pas les journalistes. Et on l'a vu. Non, vous ne l'avez pas vu. Mais oui, vous m'avez empêché de faire mon travail de journaliste.
Non, tu fais très bien ton travail de là. T'as pas besoin d'être
parce que vous pensez que les prières de rue ne sont pas d'actualité, monsieur. En passant, là, en ce moment, il y a un projet de loi pour bannir ces prières de rue-là, monsieur.
On n'est pas sur la même longueur d'onde.
OK, vous êtes du côté des musulmans, des islamistes?
Police stand by literally 5 feet away from Alexa while she's attacked by Antifa. Antifa and police both hate Rebel News. Take a look.
News, they call it! Rebel News, they call it! Rebel News, they call it! Bye bye bye!
Puis la police, ça fait rien! Hey, la police! La police! Là, sérieusement, vous avez peur de quoi? Regardez, là! Je comprends pas le message. Qu'est-ce que vous comprenez pas? Là, ils ont de la peinture. Regarde, là, ils sont en train de s'en aller dans le campagne. Là, c'est la police, OK? I just said aggressive.
And I mentioned when we went there during COVID, the police tried to raid our houseboat. We had rented a houseboat Airbnb because we had 17 rebels there, and that was a cheaper option than getting 17 hotel rooms. The police tried to raid our place. That turned into quite a big thing. Remember that?
all of a sudden, all of the Montreal police were on us like we had done something.
Come back with a warrant.
Who are these rogue, dirty cops?
You gotta stop lying.
My hands.
You gotta stop lying.
Please.
You
Go
wicked
to your right.
liar. When Montreal police accost our reporters, you know what they call us? Jew media.
What?
Who are you, sir?
I'm with Rebel News. I'm not media Juif.
Smashed my head on the police SUV.
They started expanding the police perimeter as if we're like a COVID crime scene.
They will taser you. They have already arrested one of our reporters.
Yeah, Montreal is a tough place to be a freedom journalist. But I think the interesting story I want to talk to you about today is the church. There's this big church called the Basilica in Montreal. It's very old. It's very gorgeous. It really feels like one of the great churches of Europe. There's a real Catholic history, of course, to Quebec, and that was one of the essential challenges between French Canada and British North America. And when the Brits finally won that war in the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, I think it was at 1763, part of the deal of Canada was that Quebecers got to keep their Catholic traditions, their churches, their schools. It was actually a remarkable deal that to preserve their civil rights as far back as almost 300 years ago. That really is quite an accomplishment when you think about it. But of course, those are not the ascendant demographics now. Depending on whose math you look at, Montreal is more than 10% Muslim. And of course, many Muslims are freedom-loving Muslims who are just glad to get away from Sharia law, but unfortunately, many agitators are Islamists, do support Hamas, and there's no denying it. Tens of thousands of people have marched in support of terrorism. So that's really affected the whole province and even the whole country. As Melanie Joly, the former foreign minister, said, it's the demographics. If you want to know why she's pro-Hamas, she told Tom Mulcair, another politician, it's the demographics of her own riding. She's not talking about the Greeks or the Italians or the Jews. She is talking about Islam. And it's very interesting because the city of Montreal was sued for actually over $100 million by protesters who said that the government was too harsh on minorities and Palestinians and Muslims and pro-Hamas supporters. And the city confessed. They basically threw the trial. So it was basically laundering tens of millions of taxpayers' dollars from the city to these racial activist groups, which was a huge payment to them. But it was also a message to the police, do not stop the pro-Hamas protesters. It was an incredible thing that has not been reported on, that I've seen in English Canada. Let me say that again. A bunch of pro-Hamas protesters sued the government of Montreal, which basically settled, like they admitted. They said, you're right, we were racist. Whoa, I guess we have to send tens of millions of dollars to all the radical activists in the city. Gee, that worked out well. It's basically money laundering from the city to these activists. So they don't want to hear the other point of view. They don't want to hear the pro-Canada point of view. They don't want to hear the anti-Hamas point of view. They don't want to hear the freedom point of view. They didn't want to hear the point of view that was COVID skeptical. And so they ignore these stories. Like I said, when we went out there to talk about the curfew, there were no other reporters on the street. In fact, police were shocked to encounter us. They said they had never seen another reporter cover it, like ever. And I think these Hamas protests that have taken over the streets of Montreal, just as they've done in Ottawa and Toronto, the mainstream media does not report on them. And if they're forced in some way to report on them, they support them. They whitewash the terrible things that are said. But that's what's so interesting about the decision by the pro-Hamas protesters to target the most glorious church in the city, the great Montreal Basilica, to target it for their pro-Hamas protests, and then to do something so astonishing, so much chutzpah, is to have a mass prayer. These are Hamas protesters right outside the Montreal Basilica. And who covered that? That was going on week after week. And there were no mainstream media journalists there except our friend Alexa Lavoie and her videographer Guillaume Roy. Let me play for you. I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's quite long, but let me play a couple of minutes for you from one of Alexa's many videos down there. This one got more than 300,000 views on YouTube alone. I tell you, Alexa's coverage on this and other occasions outside the Basilica was seen by millions of Montrealers and Quebecers. Even if no one from the Montreal Gazette or other official media were there, they watched Alexa do it. Here, just watch a little bit.
The two groups faced off, with Montreal for Palestine standing for a long time in front of the counter-protester. They played, of course, the card of racism and Islamophobia while flashing middle fingers. The anti-Israel protesters seemed surprised and shaken when they saw the counter-protesters waving the Quebec flag. Non, je reculerai pas, je suis désolée, je suis à une bonne distance d'eux. C'est à vous de les contrôler. Moi, je suis ici pour faire mon travail de... Non, vous me touchez pas. Attention, vous me touchez pas. J'ai le droit d'être ici puis filmer. Là, vous abusez. Vous me touchez pas, voyons, arrêtez. Hey, sérieusement, c'est n'importe quoi votre affaire, là.
Hey, vous savez, là. Vous savez, vous connaissez la ligne, là. On demande de pas faire ça.
Est-ce que vous avez fait une barricade?
On la sort du périmètre.
Je suis désolée. Non, je suis journaliste et j'ai le droit. Moi, je suis là juste pour filmer et j'ai le droit. Tantôt, j'étais sur le coin, j'étais bien plus proche d'eux autres et vous avez rien fait. Mais je suis correct ici, vous avez fait un périmètre.
Madame, juste l'autre côté avec vos collègues, on vous a laissé une zone.
J'ai pas un collègue. Touchez-moi pas, vous n'avez pas le droit de me toucher. Arrêtez de me toucher. Arrêtez, vous m'agressez quand vous me touchez.
Non, on vous agresse pas, on veut discuter avec vous.
Arrêtez, vous venez vous demander.
Alexa kept going back again and again. Here's another clip of that.
What are you doing? Not touch me, not touch me.
There are other places in Montreal that have been taken over by migrants as well. Alexa covered some of that, including, for example, swimming pools.
New, it's not really new, but this phenomenon increasing with the fact that we receive a massive new immigrants here in Quebec and in Canada.
I wouldn't say so. I don't think there's a correlation between race and like that movement, no.
Mais je sais qu'en Europe, ça fait depuis des décennies que ça existe, ce problème-là. C'est important de dire non.
Le Québec puis le Canada, c'est une culture très ouverte, mais il y a des choses qu'il faut dire non. C'est pas raciste de dire non à certaines choses, puis moi, j'aimerais ça que les féministes, les vrais féministes, ils disent assez à ça. Tu sais, eux, ils ont un double standard où on dirait, tu sais, c'est comme, oh non, on peut pas trop chialer contre ça parce que c'est raciste.
De ne pas avoir peur de dénoncer. Je pense que les gens ont été beaucoup retenus par la peur, puis à peur de se faire traiter de raciste ou d'intolérant, mais c'est pas une question de racisme ou d'intolérance, c'est tolérance zéro pour tout le monde d'agir de la sorte avec...
Mass immigration has brought many challenges, and what I'm about to show you is one of the most concerning. Women and children no longer feel safe. Incidents of staring, groping, and inappropriate behavior have been reported multiple times right here in Montreal's public swimming pools.
Now, let me say a few things about prayer. I believe that everyone should have the right to pray. A Jew in a synagogue, a Christian in a church, a Muslim in a mosque. There are close to 100 mosques in the Montreal area. There's no shortage of places to pray. But to pray on a public square or in a public street outside the Catholic Basilica is not about religious expression. It's about power. It's about dominance. It's about taking over territory, dominating public places, and violating any number of rules against public gatherings without a permit, blocking the street, blocking the sidewalk, and basically daring the police to push them away, lest they get hit with another multi-million-dollar lawsuit. This is about changing the feeling about who's in control. The police are no longer in control. The politicians are not. The Hamas street mob is. By the way, they do the same thing in Toronto all the time. In fact, when David Menzies was simply on the street reporting on one of these street prayers, which, you know, it's a fake thing. They just say it's a prayer because they want to give themselves a kind of political bulletproof armor. It was David who was arrested just for standing there. Remember that?
What is going on here? We just want you to what's the problem? Guys, excuse me, we're trying to put him behind the... Hey, that's my guy. That's my guy. Stop. Hey. Why don't you take care of the...
I tell you, I keep saying if only the trucker convoy in 2022 had just flown the Hamas flag or worn keffiyehs, they would still be there 3 years later. The police wouldn't do a thing. Maybe the police would bring them hot coffee and donuts. But that's the thing about independent journalists like Alexa. Just because the CBC and Lavoie and La Presse and the Gazette don't cover something as astonishing as Hamas protesters outside a Catholic basilica. I mean, by the way, I hope it doesn't get burnt like the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. And if it does, God forbid, may it never happen. Hopefully the government doesn't rule out arson and terrorism before even doing an investigation. But when you have Hamas protesters outside a church, it's time to put in surveillance cameras and a few more fire extinguishers, don't you think? Anyways, who cares about the regime media? Because between all of Alexa's videos on the subject, millions of views were seen by Quebecers about what was going on in English and in French. And so it was that Quebec actually ran out of patience with the Hamas protesters. They didn't quite have the courage to say it, but it was Alexa's coverage. That's not just my opinion. Other public personalities in Quebec, like Dimitri Soudis and Eric Duhem, the leader of the Conservative Party in Quebec, noted in tweets that it was Alexa Lavoie's work which raised the issue. The information got out. And even though Quebec is further down the road of political correctness than pretty much anywhere else in Canada, other than Mississauga or Hamassasaga, as I call it now. Remember that girl with the AK-47 earrings?
Hamas is not a terrorist group.
Oh, it isn't, ma'am.
First of all, Hamas is not a terrorist group.
Okay,
Hamas is not a terrorist group.
What is it, like a motorcycle club?
It is a resistance that has been fuming for 75 years of colonialism, of occupation, of murder, of rape, of little children, of women. That's what they are. They are resistance.
Do you think Canada is a colonialist country too?
Everything that they do is justified.
Including what happened last week?
Every single thing they have done is justified.
Yeah, so even though the rest of the media doesn't want to talk about it, and polite society doesn't want to talk about it, and the demographics say you don't want to talk about it, Alexa Lavoie allowed Montrealers to talk about it. And so look at the news in the newspapers today. Here's the CBC. Their headline, Quebec plans to table bill banning prayer in public. The proliferation of street prayer is a serious and sensitive issue, minister says. Let me read a little bit from the story. The Quebec government intends to present a bill banning prayer in public. Secularism Minister Jean-François Roberge said in a statement Thursday that, quote, the proliferation of street prayer is a serious and sensitive issue. The Premier of Quebec has given me the mandate to strengthen secularism, and I am determined to fulfill this mandate diligently, he said. Quote, this fall, we will therefore introduce a bill to strengthen secularism in Quebec, in particular by banning street prayers. But my friends, this is a second-degree solution to the problem, an indirect solution aimed at an indirect manifestation of the problem. What I mean by that is the problem is actually not all that praying in the streets. I mean, that is a problem, yeah, but the problem is that's more a symptom than the problem. Do you know what I'm getting at? The problem are the people themselves. They're Islamist. I'm using that word differently than Muslim. A Muslim is someone who follows the Islamic faith. An Islamist is a political weaponization of Islam, sometimes including with violence. They're weaponizing Islam to attack the institutions of the state, and in this case, the institutions of the Catholic Church. Not all Muslims do. You could see in Alexa's coverage, many of the counter-protesters against Hamas were actually secular Muslims who hate the Islamists. The problem is not the prayer outside the Basilica. That's the symptom. The problem is mass immigration. The problem is no integration into Canada or Quebec. The problem is they were told they could keep their foreign ways, including being un-Canadian and bringing their old bigotries with them, bigotry against the Jews, bigotry against the Christians. If you bring in 2 million people a year, every year to Canada, which is what Trudeau and Carney have been doing, you're not going to be able to solve this problem by going after secondary issues like whether it's halal butchers or praying on the street. You're not going to be able to stop it. And by the way, we've seen this before. If you bring in laws to solve a secondary problem, for example, hate speech against Jews, let's say, which is happening a lot, hate speech targeting Christians, hate speech targeting Jews, if you say that's what we're going to do, those laws are going to be used by Islamists to target Christians and Jews. And that's how I think this rule against public praying will be used. There are occasional Jewish and Catholic parades in Montreal. I can't think of a Jewish parade, but I'm sure there is occasional praying in a park or something. I don't know. And I know there are some official Catholic events, including a parade. Would those now be banned after centuries of the French Catholic fact in Quebec? After the Treaty of the Plains of Abraham, where they came to an agreement that Catholics would retain their religious rights? Are we going to end centuries of Catholic expression in Quebec so that we can try to stop Islamist expression? How about deal with the Islamists themselves instead of trying to put a Band-Aid on one of the problems caused by them? There is no other group that is causing this problem, that's going outside the Basilica, regularly disrupting the public on purpose. Stop trying to say this is about laicism. That's the word they use in French to talk about the opposite of religiosity. This is not about secularism. It's not about all religions. It's about stopping one particular political religious force. But Melanie Joly points out they've got the demographics. Look, here's my thoughts about this Quebec ban. It came about because Alexa Lavoie showed what was happening on the street where the rest of the media wouldn't. But the proposed solution to limit freedom of expression for religious prayer. I know what they're trying to do. It's obvious. They're trying to get these Hamas supporters away from the church. But if they can't even name the problem, they'll never be able to stop it.